The doors to the Galactic Council chamber swung open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a lone figure striding into the grand hall. The gathered representatives, dozens of species, each seated behind elaborate, floating podiums, fell silent as the human entered. Nathaniel Briggs, Earth's senior diplomat to the Council, walked with an unassuming but precise step. He wasn't in a grand ceremonial uniform or wearing the elaborate robes favored by some of the Council members. Instead, he wore a simple dark suit, tailored to perfection, with an air of casual authority. A thin, amused smirk played on his lips as his piercing blue eyes scanned the vast chamber. He knew what was coming. At the center of the room, the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council, a towering reptilian being known as Zavrek of the Zixith Dominion, stood flanked by armored guards. His golden crest rippled with tension. His six-fingered hands gripped the podium as he leaned forward, addressing the room with the deep, guttural growl of his species. "Human," Zavrek spat the word like an insult. "You stand accused of deceit, aggression, and violations of interstellar accords. The Terran coalition has grown too bold, too reckless, too dangerous." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. "Oh? And what, exactly, have we done?" A murmur rippled through the chamber. Even those who opposed humanity shifted uneasily. Zavrek's yellow eyes narrowed. "Do not feign ignorance, Earthborn. Your kind, weak, short-lived primates have spread like a virus. You do not know your place." His voice dripped with disdain. "We of the Council have determined that your influence must be curtailed before it disrupts galactic order." Nathaniel sighed, rolling his shoulders. "Ah. So this is an intervention, then? What do you call it?" He snapped his fingers. "A correction?" The High Chancellor's scales flared slightly. "You humans think you are clever," he hissed. "Your species has a talent for manipulation, for deception. You pretend to be diplomats, but you are conquerors at heart." A chuckle rumbled from deep within Nathaniel's chest. "You're giving us far too much credit." Zavrek's tail lashed against the marble floor. "Enough." His gaze swept the chamber. "Effective immediately, the Terran coalition is stripped of its council seat. Your ambassadors are exiled. And you, Nathaniel Briggs, are hereby detained." "Silence." Nathaniel blinked. "Detained." Guards began to move. Tall, armored beings, each species representing the might of the Council's military, stepped forward. Energy rifles hummed to life, humming with latent power. "Do not resist, human," Zavrek sneered. "You are surrounded." Nathaniel's smirk widened. That was their mistake. With fluid precision, he moved. One moment he stood at ease, the next, violence erupted. His hand shot out, grabbing the wrist of a towering Urdak guard. The 7-foot brute snarled as Nathaniel twisted, a sickening crack following as the alien's arm was dislocated in an instant. The rifle clattered to the ground, and in a single, seamless motion, Nathaniel caught it. Before the other guards could react, he fired. A blue pulse of energy slammed into a second guard, sending them sprawling. Panic exploded across the chamber. Council members shrieked and ducked for cover. Security officers surged forward, but Nathaniel was already moving. He was no ordinary diplomat. The Galactic Council had assumed that Earth's ambassador was a mere politician, an overconfident bureaucrat who could be silenced with a show of force. But they hadn't done their research. Nathaniel Briggs wasn't just a diplomat. He was a weapon. A veteran of the Terran Special Operations Division, he had spent years behind enemy lines, infiltrating hostile worlds, dismantling entire war efforts with nothing but his wits, his hands, and whatever weapons he could scavenge. His record was classified so deep even Earth's highest officials barely knew what he had done. And the Council? They had just attacked him in a room filled with hostiles, giving him a legitimate reason to defend himself. 2 guards rushed him. Nathaniel moved like lightning, dropping to one knee as a blade missed his throat by inches. His elbow drove into the attacker's knee, buckling it backward. The second guard lunged, but Nathaniel was already inside his reach, slamming the butt of the rifle into his jaw with a brutal crunch. More were coming. He needed to get out. His mind worked in overdrive, analyzing angles, exits, weaknesses. He spotted a council member, a frail avian dignitary, frantically pressing a security override panel on the far wall. Nathaniel's eyes locked onto the mechanism above, a set of blast doors sealing shut. Not happening. He adjusted his aim. A single shot destroyed the control panel, sparks showering as the override shorted out. The doors froze halfway down. Perfect. He sprinted. More shots rang out, but he moved with inhuman precision. He dove, rolling through the gap just before the blast doors sealed shut. Behind him, furious roars and shouted commands filled the chamber. Nathaniel exhaled, standing in a dimly lit corridor. He had seconds before pursuit. Time to go. He navigated the council's labyrinthine corridors with ruthless efficiency. Every step, every turn, was calculated. He knew the council complex's layout, had memorized it long before today. He needed an exit. More alarms blared. Automated defenses whirred to life. Energy turrets unfolded from hidden recesses, tracking movement. Nathaniel grabbed a discarded guard's ID badge, holding it up to a scanner as he sprinted past. The system hesitated just long enough for him to slide beneath the turret's firing arc. The moment he was past, the turret registered his heat signature and fired, hitting the squad of guards that had been chasing him instead. Beautiful. He kept moving. The docking bay was within sight. The Council's elite forces, heavily armed, battle-hardened warriors, were mobilizing. A blockade was forming. Nathaniel slowed. Considered. Assessed. Then, he grinned. They thought they had him trapped. He saw the key to his escape, a Council warship, primed for departure. The problem? It was guarded by an entire squad of soldiers. But Nathaniel had faced worse odds. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Then he moved. The first guard saw nothing but a blur before Nathaniel's fist crushed his throat. The second had time to lift his rifle before a roundhouse kick shattered his jaw. By the time the others reacted, Nathaniel was inside their defenses, turning their weapons against them. A blade flashed. An energy rifle discharged. Bodies fell. In under 15 seconds, the dock was his. He sprinted up the ramp of the warship, sealing the hatch behind him. The engines roared to life. Outside, the Council forces scrambled, weapons aimed. Too late. Nathaniel keyed in the controls, overriding security. The ship lifted, thrusters flaring. As the Council chamber's defenses tried to activate, he engaged the ship's jump drive. Starlight twisted. Then he was gone. In the quiet hum of hyperspace, Nathaniel leaned back in the pilot's chair, running a hand through his hair. The Council had underestimated humanity. And that mistake was going to cost them. The stolen warship burst from hyperspace into the empty void between galactic territories, its hull still cooling from the violent jump. Nathaniel Briggs sat in the pilot's chair, his fingers drumming against the console as he calculated his next move. The adrenaline of his escape hadn't worn off yet, his mind still buzzed with tactical considerations. He was alive. He was free. But he was also in deep, deep trouble. The Galactic Council wouldn't take this lightly. No one assaulted their security forces, stole one of their warships, and got away without consequences. Nathaniel smirked. The problem with being underestimated was that people didn't realize they were making a mistake until it was far too late. But he couldn't get cocky. He needed a plan. The ship's systems flickered, struggling under the strain of the forced takeoff. He scanned the damage reports. Minor structural fractures, moderate shield depletion, a few shorted subsystems, nothing he couldn't handle. The real issue was fuel. This thing was built for planetary defense, not long-haul travel. If he didn't find a refueling station soon, he'd be dead in the void. A soft beeping interrupted his thoughts. Nathaniel turned to the sensor readout. His stomach tightened. They had found him. The Council's response was faster than he expected. A battlecruiser dropped out of hyperspace behind him, flanked by a squadron of smaller attack craft. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose. Guess you guys aren't wasting time. The comm panel lit up. An incoming transmission. He hesitated, then opened the channel. A familiar face appeared on screen. Zavrek. The reptilian High Chancellor's golden eyes burned with fury. Briggs, he growled. "I should have expected nothing less from a barbarian like you. But did you really believe you could escape the might of the Galactic Council?" Nathaniel leaned back, crossing his arms. "Well, I did, actually. And, for the record, I still do." Zavrek bared his fangs. "You are outnumbered. You are outgunned. There is nowhere left to run." Nathaniel grinned. "You forgot one thing, lizard." "And what is that?" Zavrek hissed. "I'm human." Nathaniel cut the transmission. Then he hit the throttle. The warship shuddered as it accelerated, diving toward a nearby asteroid field. The Council forces reacted instantly. Fighters broke formation, streaking after him like hunting birds. The battlecruiser stayed back, its cannons priming for long-range bombardment. Nathaniel twisted the controls, sending the ship into a violent roll. Energy blasts seared past, missing by inches. The asteroid field loomed ahead. A swirling mass of jagged rock, tumbling through the void at lethal speeds. A death trap. For anyone else. Nathaniel smirked. He dove into the field at full speed. The ship vibrated as it weaved through the debris. Nathaniel's hands moved with instinctive precision, adjusting thrusters on the fly. The pursuing fighters hesitated, then followed. Their mistake. Nathaniel juked hard, slipping through a narrow gap between two colliding asteroids. One of the Council fighters tried to follow. The pilot miscalculated by a fraction of a second. The asteroid smashed into the ship's wing, sending it spinning into another rock. A brief explosion lit up the void. Nathaniel didn't look back. The comms crackled again. This time, it wasn't Zavrek. It was a Council officer. "Attention, stolen vessel. You are ordered to surrender. Disable your engines and prepare to be boarded." Nathaniel exhaled. His fingers danced over the controls. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's not happening." He cut the engines. For a brief moment, his ship drifted. The pursuing fighters adjusted course, slowing their approach. Then Nathaniel punched the emergency thrusters. His ship rocketed backward, straight into the closest fighter. The impact sent both vessels tumbling. The enemy craft spun out of control, slamming into an asteroid. Nathaniel gritted his teeth, stabilizing his own ship. 2 more fighters remained. Time for another trick. He rerouted power to the rear shields, then armed the warship's missile bay. The targeting system locked onto an asteroid, one of the biggest ones. Nathaniel fired. The missile struck with a thunderous explosion. The asteroid cracked apart, sending a deadly cloud of debris outward. The fighters had no time to react. One was torn apart instantly. The second managed to veer away, only to find itself directly in Nathaniel's sights. He fired. The last enemy ship vanished in a fireball. Nathaniel exhaled. Then the battlecruiser opened fire. A beam of searing energy lanced through space, slicing past his ship. Nathaniel banked hard, but the sheer force of the blast rocked his vessel. Warning sirens blared. Zavrek wasn't playing around anymore. Nathaniel checked his systems. Shields were nearly gone. Weapons were low on ammo. The engines, struggling. He needed a way out. Fast. His eyes flicked to the nav display. And there it was. A derelict space station, drifting just beyond the asteroid field. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He set course and punched the engines. The battlecruiser followed. The station was ancient, its metal hull scarred and lifeless. No power signatures. No signs of habitation. Perfect. Nathaniel brought his ship in hard, skidding along the docking bay floor before coming to a stop. He grabbed his sidearm and sprinted out. The Council forces would be on him in minutes. Time for Plan B. He moved through the station's dark corridors, scanning for anything useful. Weapons, supplies, anything. Instead, he found something else. A control panel. Still active. Nathaniel's mind raced. If the station still had power, it might have. He checked the interface. Yes. Automated defenses. Still operational. Nathaniel grinned. He activated them all. The battlecruiser deployed troops. Dozens of armored soldiers stormed the station, weapons raised. Then the turrets came online. Gunfire erupted. The corridors filled with screams as automated defenses tore into the invaders. Nathaniel moved fast, picking off stragglers as chaos unfolded. He was outnumbered. But that didn't matter. He was the one-man army. And he wasn't going down easy. By the time Zavrek realized what had happened, half his forces were dead. The rest were retreating. Nathaniel stood atop the station's main control hub, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He opened the comms. "Hey, Zavrek. Silence. Then, you will pay for this, human." Nathaniel chuckled. "You say that like you still have the upper hand." More silence. Then Zavrek cut the connection. Nathaniel exhaled. He wasn't done yet. Now, it was time to go on the offensive. The derelict space station was silent again, save for the faint hum of its aging systems and the occasional crackle of electrical discharge from ruined consoles. The station's corridors were littered with the bodies of Council troops, some still smoldering from the automated defense turrets, others taken down by Nathaniel's own hand. Nathaniel Briggs stood at the control panel, his breathing steady, his pulse even. His body ached from the earlier fight, but he ignored it. There was no time for pain. His stolen warship sat in the docking bay, damaged but still functional. Outside, the Council's battlecruiser loomed, its massive form casting a shadow over the dead station. Zavrek had withdrawn his forces after the slaughter, but Nathaniel knew it wasn't over. The Chancellor wouldn't give up that easily. And he was right. The comm panel flickered to life. Zavrek's reptilian face filled the screen, his golden eyes burning with controlled fury. "I hope you enjoyed your little victory, human," Zavrek growled. "Because it is your last." Nathaniel smirked, leaning against the console. "You sure? 'Cause I'm feeling pretty good about my odds." Zavrek's nostrils flared. "Enough of your insolence. You are alone. You are stranded. And you are now the most wanted man in the galaxy. Surrender now, and perhaps I will grant you a swift execution." Nathaniel pretended to think for a moment. "Yeah, that's a hard pass." Zavrek bared his fangs. "So be it." The comm link cut. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose. He turned back to the station's control panel, running his fingers over the ancient interface. He needed a plan. The battlecruiser would be preparing for another assault, and he was low on options. Then he saw it. A schematic of the station. His lips curled into a grin. Nathaniel moved quickly, setting his plan into motion. The station wasn't just a derelict ruin, it had once been a weapons platform, an old defense outpost from a long-forgotten war. Most of its systems were dead, but not all of them. Buried deep in the station's structure, hidden beneath layers of dust and neglect, was a long-abandoned railgun. And it still had power. Not much. Not enough for a full-strength shot. But enough for one last punch. The battlecruiser began its approach again, its engines burning bright against the black void. Nathaniel could see its weapons priming. They weren't taking chances this time. They would reduce the station to slag rather than let him escape. He had one shot. The railgun's targeting systems were ancient, their tracking algorithms sluggish, but Nathaniel compensated manually. He adjusted for drift, for power decay, for every variable his mind could process. The battlecruiser's cannons glowed with stored energy. Nathaniel pressed the trigger. The railgun fired. The force of the shot sent a violent tremor through the station's structure, dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. The massive slug of metal tore through the void, a streak of death traveling faster than any eye could follow. It hit. Not the battlecruiser's main hull, that would have been wishful thinking. No, Nathaniel had aimed for something more vulnerable. The engines. A thunderous explosion ripped through the rear section of the battlecruiser. Fire and debris bloomed into space as the ship lurched violently to one side, its thrusters failing, its momentum spinning it off course. Nathaniel grinned. Gotcha. But it wasn't over. Even crippled, the battlecruiser was still a threat. It couldn't maneuver, but its weapons were still functional. And now, it was angry. A massive energy blast seared through the station's hull, tearing through decks and exposing parts of the structure to open space. Nathaniel barely managed to hold onto the console as the entire station rocked from the impact. He had to move. Now. He sprinted through the corridors, dodging fallen debris and flames. His stolen warship was still in the docking bay, its systems struggling to power up. He slammed his fist into the launch controls, forcing the ship's engines into emergency startup. The bay doors were still closed. Nathaniel didn't have time to open them manually. So he did the next best thing. He shot them. Explosions rocked the docking bay as the doors buckled outward. The vacuum of space howled through the cracks. Nathaniel jumped into the pilot's seat and hit the thrusters. The ship lurched forward. The moment he was clear of the station, the battle cruiser fired again. The shot vaporized the station entirely. Nathaniel's ship spun wildly as the shockwave hit, alarms blaring, systems flickering. He fought for control, gripping the controls like a vice. He stabilized. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Another fleet. More Council ships dropping out of hyperspace. Zavrek had called reinforcements. And now Nathaniel was trapped. The comms crackled again. Zavrek's voice, smug and victorious. You had your moment, human. But it ends here. Nathaniel tightened his grip on the controls. His mind raced. He was out of tricks, out of weapons, out of options. Unless. His eyes flicked to the nav display. The debris field from the destroyed station was still expanding, scattering metal and wreckage across the void. And directly behind it, a black hole. It was a terrible idea. A suicidal idea. But it was the only idea. Nathaniel turned the ship toward the black hole and pushed the engines to full throttle. Zavrek's laughter rang through the comms. Running to your death? Pathetic. Nathaniel grinned. Let's find out. The Council fleet pursued. Nathaniel weaved through the debris field, using the wreckage as cover. Council ships opened fire, but their shots were wild, scattered, too cautious. They were afraid of getting too close to the black hole. Nathaniel wasn't. His ship's warning system screamed at him. Gravity was pulling him in. He could feel the ship shaking apart under the strain. The Council fleet hesitated. That was all he needed. At the last possible second, Nathaniel activated his ship's emergency warp drive. The ship bucked violently, then disappeared into hyperspace. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his body. He had survived. For now. But the war was only beginning. Callum had never been cheered by a crowd before. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just an engineer on a backwater refueling station who had accidentally convinced the entire galaxy that humans were an unstoppable warrior race. And yet, here he was, standing in the center of a galactic arena, surrounded by roaring alien spectators, with a 7-foot Zarkani warrior pounding his chest in respect. Humanity's reputation had just taken a wild turn. Callum wiped sweat from his forehead, trying to process everything that had just happened. The fight was over. He had won. Well, technically, he had survived. But apparently, for the aliens watching, that was way more impressive than winning outright. The Zalari noble stepped forward, still studying Callum with sharp golden eyes. You were outmatched in size, strength, and physical endurance, he mused. And yet, you prevailed. Callum shrugged. That's kind of a human thing. The Corthan emissary inclined his head. Your strategy, your ability to adapt mid-combat, it is concerning. Cathal, still grinning despite his loss, pounded a fist against Callum's shoulder hard enough to nearly knock him over. It is honorable. Callum winced. Cool. Glad you think so. Just, maybe don't break my ribs, big guy. Hannah, watching from the sidelines, smirked. So what now? The whole sector saw that fight. How do we fix the fact that half the galaxy thought we were invincible death machines 10 minutes ago? The alien representatives exchanged glances. Then, to everyone's shock, the Zalari noble bowed. We acknowledge humanity's strength. The Corthan emissary followed suit, pressing a clawed fist to his chest. We see now that our fears were misguided. The Zarkani warlord chuckled. We feared your warriors. But now we honor them. Callum blinked. Wait. Are we seriously getting diplomatic respect because I tripped a guy? Hannah elbowed him. Callum. Shut up and take the win. Back on the Federation ship, The debrief was awkward. Admiral Carson stared at Callum through the holo screen, rubbing his temples like he was fighting off the mother of all migraines. So, let me summarize. You accidentally caused a sector-wide panic. Callum winced. Yeah. You were nearly responsible for an intergalactic war. And you fixed it by beating a 7-foot alien in a wrestling match. Callum hesitated. Technically, I outlasted him. Carson exhaled. Jesus Christ, Briggs. Callum sighed. Look, Admiral, I get it. We screwed up. But it worked out, didn't it? Carson grumbled. Somehow. Hannah leaned in. So what happens now? Do we, formally explain the misunderstanding to the galaxy? Carson shook his head. No point. The aliens already decided what they believe. He gestured to a report on his screen. After that fight, the Zarkani offered a non-aggression pact. The Korthans are requesting joint military training drills. The Zalari are asking to open cultural exchanges. Callum blinked. Wait. So, we accidentally scared the entire galaxy into respecting us. Carson scowled. Yes. Hannah grinned. And we don't have to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. Carson sighed. Correct. Callum frowned. So we're just gonna let them think we're a species of indestructible warriors. Carson exhaled. Briggs. Yes, sir. Shut the hell up and take the win. The official reports would never mention the real reason the aliens feared humanity. The diplomatic papers would talk about strategic displays of combat expertise and tactical demonstrations of human adaptability. But the truth? The truth was that the entire galactic community had been absolutely terrified by a bunch of staged fight scenes from ancient Earth television. Somewhere out there, alien generals were still studying WWF championship matches like they were sacred battle tactics. Somewhere, an insectoid warlord was watching Rambo and taking notes. And somewhere in deep space, an alien civilization was picking up their first human transmission. A broadcast of Dragon Ball Z. Humanity had accidentally convinced the galaxy that they were a race of unstoppable super warriors. And Callum? Callum was just hoping no one ever found anime. Because if they did, the galaxy was really screwed.